You're listening to Blockchain 2025. The future is right now. Every week, we explore implications of the technology underpinning cryptocurrencies. Blockchain.
Each episode is a standalone examination of one industry broken into 3 segments. A basic overview, blockchain's disruptive impact, and relevant crypto projects.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
Welcome to another episode of Blockchain 2025. This is your co-host, Matt Aaron, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. Blake is not here. He is traveling, and I have Xinshu Dong on the show. Xinshu is from Zilliqa, which I guess you could call maybe a smart contract platform like Ethereum, but they were like a 2.0 or 3.0, but designed from the ground up for speed of transactions. I'm going to have Xinshu come on today and, in layman's terms, explain exactly what Zilliqa is, but give us a state of blockchain projects, the state of blockchain in the alpha phase ending 2018. So without further ado, Xinshu, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. It's my pleasure to be here.
And Xinshu, I mentioned this before, you're in Singapore. It has the reputation of being one of the top ICO spots in the world. What's it like working in blockchain in Singapore?
I think Singapore is definitely a very attractive place to be in if you want to work on anything blockchain. So, the regulatory environment is just very friendly, very supportive. People here generally understand that this is something new, although people don't fully understand, where this is going, but people appreciate this is a cool technology. It's going to change many people's lives. So for instance, even the government here have different programs and grants to support the development of blockchain technology. And sometimes they themselves work very hard to come up with use cases where they think blockchain can make a difference. So in such an environment, you just feel like very welcomed. You feel like, this is a place to be in if you really want to make a huge difference by leveraging on the new technology.
It really helps to have a government and regulatory structure that supports you as opposed to having to fight against it, which happens in a lot of countries. I have read, I'm not sure if this is true, that either it's in process or it already happens, that all universities in Singapore are going to put diplomas on the blockchain, which is a pretty simple use case, but something that can be fraudulent. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I think that's one of the trials which is going on now. Definitely, that's something very interesting. Of course, this is one of the early use cases, but it's going to be a big thing once such a trend starts to move.
And Xinshu, so let's get into blockchain. It's a buzzword, as you know. Zilliqa has quite the reputation in the space. I mean that in a positive way. A lot of people told me like, "Wow, Zilliqa's going to figure out sharding, et cetera, et cetera." But for someone that's new to blockchain, when they say, well, hey, Bitcoin already has a blockchain, Ethereum has a blockchain, why does the world need a Zilliqa blockchain?
Well, I think that's a very good question. So I think when we come to the blockchain, we need to first understand a little bit what the blockchain does. So in general, blockchain is sort of providing an alternative way to do many things, whether this is banking, it's about payment, about messaging, about social networking, about gaming, about insurance, about anything. So today you are sort of relying on a more centralized infrastructure to provide such services. That's, one company. That can be, 2 to 3 companies forming an alliance. But then what blockchain can do is really to provide sort of an environment where you don't have to even have the setup of companies. You can just have an infrastructure running there forever, and then you can happily build stuff there. But then this kind of, very nice structure, of course, comes with some cost. So one cost is that because you don't necessarily have one central party coordinating everyone in the ecosystem or, in the infrastructure. You sort of have different parties working together in an automated way. And then that kind of things definitely, sometimes take more time. For example, if I'm going to make all the decisions for my company, it's going to be fast. But sometimes it's problematic, people see all the problems with it. But then let's say we have 10 people running the company, and that's very nice. Even if I'm sick today, I don't worry, the company will have any problem. But then the 10 people have to talk sometimes. Sometimes they disagree with each other. They have to find a way out. So this is sort of an intrinsic performance overhead that comes with blockchain protocols in general. And what Zilliqa does is to see how we can make such protocols more efficient, so that although we are still running, the infrastructure without a central party coordinating everything, it can still be much faster than today's blockchain. So that's where we started as the Zilliqa project.
That's very interesting. I'm going to rephrase it back to you in case any listeners got lost there. So I really like that analogy there, that it's like a company with, I think of nodes, people running a blockchain. Let's just say it's a company with 1,000 people running it, right? What you see in Bitcoin, there's well over 1,000 nodes. And so they have to govern together, and it can be slower than a centralized decision-making company.
Right.
So you have to find a way to take advantage of the decentralization aspect, meaning that it can't be shut down. We'll get into this in a little bit. You mentioned that you don't even need to form a company, but getting, 1,000 different leaders of a company to work together, right? And that's kind of the governance of the protocol. And so you mentioned you don't even need to form a company. Can you elaborate on that?
So if you think about it, why do we need a company, right? So there are different reasons. I mean, there's definitely a legal aspect of it, which, we'll not discuss too much because sometimes you still need legal protection. But just imagine that we are living in some space where, the legal aspect is already covered. And then you need a company so that you can have a structure. And with that structure, you can run things. You have a CEO, who will work with the CTO and COO, CMO, and things like that. And they'll have their respective teams. And then the company are somehow grouped together to make their products ready and then, roll out their products. But now imagine that you don't have this kind of, structure. In the past decades, we already have different organizations who are almost functioning like that, in a very free form, let's say the open source community. But still, you still need some infrastructure that can systemize the process or somehow can automate the process. The blockchain is sort of that kind of infrastructure, because you have this kind of distributed computing system that keeps running, and then you can just throw all the tasks to it. You can say, do this for me, do that for me, verify this for me, verify that for me. That kind of infrastructure to me is fundamental. This is beyond just the technology. It goes into the space where people now can imagine that I can even do business on this kind of platform. I don't need to even decide how to charge or how much I need to charge when I sell products to others, because all these things can be automated in something called smart contracts. And that's, basically just a program running on top of this infrastructure.
So Xinshu, I want to go back into that. Give me a very tangible example of not needing a company and launching a product or service via the blockchain.
If you look at this DAO example, I think that's a very good one. Yeah.
The DAO, and that's a decentralized autonomous organization.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you're referring to, correct?
Yes, exactly. So if you look at DAO, it's basically, a smart contract that gives people the opportunity to put in their money and then invest into other projects. This is almost like, a fund structure or a VC structure. And then in that case, you didn't need a company. You didn't even need to register a company per se. Everything is, is automated with a smart contract. And then people could have some ways to vote to decide, which project proposal they would like to sort of support or invest in a sense.
So Xinshu, I just want to make a really tangible example here, right? So you mentioned a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, compared to something like an LLC or a C Corp in the United States, a corporation. But in this case, let's just say we're going to do a decentralized gaming casino platform. Let's say you, me, Scott, two other people. So we create this smart contract, meaning that we each put in a certain amount of Zilliqa, Ethereum, or Bitcoin tied to this contract. That's the investment. And the contract will also say how profits are distributed, meaning money comes in will automatically be distributed to the shareholders, and maybe a termination clause saying that if 4 or 5 submit a private key, to this contract or execute something on the contract, then the company is dissolved or one person is kicked out of the company. Something like that, correct?
Yes, you are absolutely right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this is sort of like a precursor of, examples we may see in the near future, but I think it's a good one. Of course, it has some security incidents, that's why we have to look at security very seriously, but, that's a good concept. And it worked in some way. I think the main challenge to make such decentralized businesses working on top of blockchain is that whether people are sort of very open to accepting this kind of tokens, as whether investment or as, funds or as payments. So that's a challenge that, we all have to work on.
Gotcha. And so looking at Zilliqa, is it fair to say that you looked at Bitcoin, you looked at Ethereum, and decided that building a new blockchain made sense because of speed? Is that the reason why people can build, decentralized applications on top of Zilliqa? Is that the main selling point for Zilliqa?
I think we mainly look at Ethereum because Bitcoin, is a slightly different type. It's mainly used as transfer value or store value in a sense. But then we are more like Ethereum, where we want to run smart contract. We provide a platform where people can run programs. So that's why we started to realize that this scalability can be a performance bottleneck that will prevent more and more interesting applications to be running on top of the blockchain. Otherwise, people are sort of competing for that 10 transactions every second. And to us, it's not very sustainable.
Gotcha. And so you're betting that Ethereum's blockchain, we love what Ethereum's doing, but we think that the way it's structured, it's going to be too slow. So we're making a faster one. Are there any projects, building on top of Zilliqa right now?
There are a few sort of building on our testnet because we haven't launched our mainnet. So there is this project where we are working with Mindshare or Group M. So the idea is that if you look at digital advertising space, that's almost a perfect example where you have different parties. They are working together, but they don't have one party who is super dominant or who is, coordinating everything. People trust each other in some way, but, they still don't have 100% trust on everyone else. So you have, for example, people who want to say, I want to show ads of my phone or my laptop. And then, this person will go to an ads agency, and the agency will liaise with, the demand side sort of platform, and then going through an exchange. The exchange was basically buy and sell the space in different web pages, of different quality, of different popularity. And then it'll go to, other parties. Basically, it's a chain of different agents in a sense to make, ad impressions really happen. So now in this space, there were some challenges when people had to deal with fraud or people had to deal with very low quality of the eventual page that is actually showing the ads. And then if we bring blockchain in, really this is, a good platform where things become much more transparent. You have to be sort of accountable for what you do now. But of course, there are many challenges in actually making that work. Scalability is definitely one of them. That's why, they are working happily with us to provide sort of a more scalable platform to bring all these parties in, because you can have billions of transactions, every day. So that's sort of the scale we have to, achieve in the months to come.
Interesting. And Xinshu, I'm going to repeat this back to you again. So ad sharing, ad serving, I know that a cell phone plan in the US, the amount of cookies and scripts you have to run, right?
Yes.
You spend so much money on data and the internet's slower on your phone. Well, it's not slower. It's just you're spending so much time loading all this tracking, a lot of it against your consent. It could be, 20% of all your data that you consume in a month. And there's, I've done AdWords, Google Ads for a while, and I know that there's a lot of fraud. There's fraud protection. But by putting the publishers as well as the advertisers through a blockchain protocol that's fast, that moves quickly, you can keep all this data, you can verify against fraud, as well as make the buying and selling cheaper because you have this fast blockchain, which costs very little per transaction, meaning that, Google AdWords takes a large percentage of revenue. There's other big, Facebook ads, et cetera, that are centralized. It will be much cheaper. In terms of serving an ad on Zilliqa, what will the typical transaction fee be for a Zilliqa transaction once it's live?
So that is something we still have to work on. We are at this stage where we are just doing trials to make sure that, the workflow works. We haven't gone into the details into payments. And as I said, this is not a, easy project. This is a very challenging project, but I think it has great potential. So everyone, participating in are very excited. So for example, at this stage, we are making a lot of assumptions in terms of payments just to make the scenarios much simpler. We are actually using the blockchain to streamline the payment cycles, because previously what happened was that you sort of make an assumption that, let's say, 90% of my ads that are going to be shown this week will be really viewable. Viewable means, there's some standard which says this ad is really viewable to a human being, not a bot, for example. But then let's say at the end of the week, according to the report, only 85% of the ads were actually viewable. Then the next week's billing cycle will do some adjustment to sort of reflect that kind of difference, which is painful, which is, not really automated. So that's why, if we use blockchain and then, as you said, everything is transparent, everything can be verified. we don't have to go through that kind of, adjustment in billing cycles.
Now, you mentioned this, that it's an experiment, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I think, Bitcoin is an experiment. Everything's an experiment at this point. I mean, we're still early, in the alpha stage right now. When do you expect to see, blockchain being used on a massive scale?
I think that's, sort of the $1 million question. And I totally agree with you. We're at this alpha stage overall. It doesn't mean that the product is not usable, but really we are very early. But unfortunately, not too many people see this. People sometimes want to see mass adoption like yesterday. This is really difficult to predict because this is a super new technology. It's very challenging to build. It's also very challenging to use at this stage. We need different stakeholders to actually, be more committed in thinking about how do we move different use cases onto the blockchain, or even how do we create a new use case that, is not even in the traditional industry sectors that can be enabled by the blockchain. I wouldn't want to sort of, bet that 2019 would just be the year where we will definitely see mass adoptions. But I think in 2019, you are going to see at least some very interesting use cases that will just, basically wow everyone. That will give everyone sort of greater confidence that this thing is going well. People wanted to have that in 2018, but unfortunately, many infrastructures were not ready. But I think, let's say, Zilliqa is rolling out its mainnet. And if you look at many other interesting projects, they are almost about to have their mainnet ready in early 2019. I think that's a year where sort of the technical barriers are going to be largely resolved. And then people are going to build much cooler applications on top of the blockchain.
That's very interesting. So 2018 was, in summary, just working on some of these really difficult technical problems and figuring those out. 2019, it's not full-scale adoption by any means, but some projects, some really interesting use cases and projects that start to work and become productive in the world that show people, hey, it's still maybe in beta or entering beta, but this is a taste and this will get people more excited in the ecosystem to continue joining the blockchain ecosystem, whether it's as a developer or a business developer or in marketing, whatever that may be.
Yes, if I have to bet, I would, bet something like that.
Okay, and, your dream scenario, give me the example of some decentralized apps, some dApps that you'd like to see operating and why you think they are so perfect for a blockchain.
I think, the number one thing to me is still about payment. This is such a simple problem, but this is such a difficult problem. People can use Bitcoin for payments, for sure, across the globe. But still, this is not getting the traction that people were expecting to have. I think there are many fundamental issues that underline such, challenges in terms of technology, in terms of, business models or things like that. But to me, once we have payment, that's going to be really a killer application for me on blockchain. But then I'm also very interested in games. So if you talk about, being at an early stage in the blockchain space in general, then blockchain-powered games are at an even much earlier stage. We are, having some interesting games, but I think the potential is just going to be bigger. So for example, having this idea that your, in-game virtual assets can live on some platform perpetually, forever, I think that's a very cool idea. So people are sort of trying to leverage that idea to create games. But if you look at today's blockchain-based games, yes, there are some smart contracts, there are some states that live on the blockchain. But if that gaming company really goes bankrupt tomorrow, the gamers will still suffer. So that kind of idea needs to be further developed, in my view. Yeah, then insurance is definitely very interesting. It sometimes is really a painful process, and it's such a black box. I think that's something we can definitely try to revolutionize as well. But of course, there are many challenges. Maybe we have to start with simple insurance schemes, and then we move on to more sophisticated ones.
And so insurance, that can get incredibly complicated. And I think the need is obvious with the inefficiency, the amount of time and money spent on middlemen, fraud, etc. But just something as simple as if there was a way to timestamp when a flight took off, and if the flight was more than an hour late, sending a certain amount of cryptocurrency to the person flying or, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, with gaming, a lot of people don't realize Second Life and their Linden dollars. Gaming is all about having native currencies and tokens and things like that. But you're right, they can be shut down. So the ability to create a game on top of a blockchain that exists into perpetuity is very interesting. I think whoever designs that Yeah, there's going to be a lot of trial and error there to get it right in terms of like the game that takes off.
Right.
Gaming is a gigantic space. And even looking at crypto collectibles, right? Crypto kitties, which is a game, right? You can breed the kitties. A lot of people were dismissing it. I think I may have dismissed it, but we did an episode on Xinshu, on crypto collectibles. And Eric Voorhees was like, 2019 is going to be the year of crypto collectibles and these blockchain-based collectible games. I think you're right on that, man. I think it's something to watch.
And there's another interesting aspect to sort of look at. I mean, we're talking about dreams, right? This is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. But then if you look at games, the fans sometimes, they are ready to spend, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of emotion into the games they love. But it's not super clear what they can get out of, such activities. Sometimes just really a hobby. Sometimes, of course, you can create some valuable virtual assets that can be sold. But really, I mean, the efforts and even, attachment from these fans to games sometimes actually create real value, right? Create real value for the game itself, for example. How do we incentivize such gamers or fans to create more like user-generated content in that sense, where they can also get some profits out of, the general sort of growth of the games or the gaming industry? That's another aspect we can look at by using blockchain.
And you see this starting even like some of the decentralized social networks with tipping, like Memo.cash on the BCH blockchain, right? Steemit's more like a centralized company. I don't know if that's the best example there. But yeah, I think incentives are huge, and being able to also be paid for your contributions, because there's plenty of websites where people make large contributions to the platform and they're not rewarded or incentivized. Or I shouldn't say they are incentivized, and it can lead to money indirectly, but they're not directly incentivized on the platform to be compensated for their contributions to the ecosystem.
Yes, that's precisely the point.
And so the whole idea is like, if you're in a game, maybe you could create some type of weapon. You could design a weapon. And if the weapon sells well in the game, people are like, buying it, selling it, trading and using it, then you could generate income from being a weapons creator for a game. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, that may be already the case with some games today at least. But I'm just thinking that even if the effort the gamers spend in a game, it cannot create something so tangible, cannot create a weapon, for example. But still, there's a lot of time spent. They are being there, they are accompanying each other as sort of gaming buddies. Even that kind of thing is very valuable for the game itself. And the game may be making a lot of money out of it, but these gamers still need to get incentivized. That will create a much more sustainable ecosystem.
That's interesting. So if you could bring people into the game or form a community inside the game somehow, but something that proves that you're building the ecosystem, you could be rewarded for that as well. That's very cool.
Right.
Well, Xinshu, so summing things up here, we're still in alpha. We're still early days. The future is bright. The potential is huge. We don't know exactly where it's going to go. Zilliqa is a smart contract platform aimed at speed because they see the need for, millions of transactions per second.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say millions. I mean, thousands, let's say.
Thousands a second. Okay, thousands a second.
Right.
And I was getting carried away, man. You got me excited. But yeah, man, I mean, listen, I have to ask this because a lot of blockchain projects, they had a tough year. How are you guys doing financially? Have you had to lay people off, or is the team still going strong?
We are still hiring. We have enough cash to sort of have a year's runway ahead of us. We are still, committed, and we have all the resources necessary to build the platform and make it adopted.
Gotcha. So you still have a good 12 months of runway for the company.
No, way more than that. We have about 3 to 4 years runway.
Okay, great, good. Because it's going to take some time, right? And so that's good that you have that time to work and hopefully build that ecosystem. Well, Xinshu, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on Blockchain 2025.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.